Hey everybody, welcome to Fulfilled. I'm your host, Rebecca Sheehan. Today we're going to talk about one of the most elusive luxuries in our society, rest and renewal. Humans seem to have this innate tendency to drive ourselves to the point of utter and complete burnout. And our constant use of screens makes it even worse, keeping our fight or flight system on high alert pretty much all the time. It's funny though, overworking ourselves is clearly not a new problem, since God felt the need to include a day of rest in the Ten Commandments. And when you look at it this way, you could see the Sabbath as a true gift from God, yet so many Jews and Christians tend to ignore it entirely. It's so hard to stop and take a breath when the world pulls us so strongly into treating it like just another day. This is a problem, and it's one that people are talking about even more right now, ever since the tragic assassination of Charlie Kirk, since he was so vocal and passionate about observing the Sabbath. Not just going to church, but in a way closer to the original Old Testament sense, truly shutting down from Friday sundown to Saturday at sundown. Charlie even wrote a book on this called Stop in the Name of God. So what does the Sabbath mean for Christians today? Should it be observed like Charlie Kirk urged, or does it risk sliding into legalism, the false belief that we need to follow rules really well to earn God's love, rather than trusting in His grace? To help us explore this question and more, I'm thrilled to welcome Pastor Mark Buchanan, author of The Rest of God, Restoring Your Soul by Restoring Sabbath, which is a thoughtful and practical guide to living Sabbath in a way that can transform your faith and your life. Mark, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, Rebecca, it's a real pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
So this is a very specific topic. How did you become passionate enough to write a book about it?
Yeah, the book's called The Rest of God, but it did come out of this crisis where I was, imploding. I was not functioning well in my work, in my relationships, in my health, and God led me into a discovery of this gift of Sabbath. So the book is really, in some ways, a celebration of this gift. It's the goodness of God and saying, here, why don't you stop? Which is really what Shabbat means. Sabbath means stop. Why don't you stop now? But I build into it also, after every chapter, what I call a Sabbath liturgy. Here's a little practice you might try to sort of slow down, to be present, to notice, to pay attention.
So it's more a mindset rather than things to do or not do.
It really is like it. Yeah, this is a gift. It was built into the creation as a gift. The covenant makes it law, because I think that it got so neglected both by the people of God and by the wider culture that it had to be restored as a law so that we took it seriously and then gave it back to the rest of the world.
Pharisees, I think, give it such a bad rap in the Bible. I mean, the way they tried to keep it so strictly, like Jesus is doing such great things, and they're yelling at him for not keeping the Sabbath.
Yeah. You can't heal on the Sabbath. How dare you? Wait a second. This lady was suffering for 18 years, and you don't want me to sort of restore the shatteredness of creation. I think actually the deep meaning of Sabbath is we switch from the mode of productivity where I have to create things. I have to earn my keep, in a sense. I have to kind of justify my existence by productivity. The beauty of the gift of Sabbath is God says, now I want you to come back into your childlike delight in my fatherly love for you. And so we switch out of that to the mode of receptivity, where we receive what God wants to give. So sleep, especially during the day, a nap is an unproductive thing in some ways. It's almost inherently. And even if we sort of use the language of power nap, that I'm going to kind of get this 20 minutes that is going to energize me to do more things, we can dispense with all of that and just say, my body is saying, this would be lovely if you could just lie down on the couch or in the bed or whatever for the next 30 or 40 minutes. And I don't have to produce anything. I'm just going to receive.
That makes me feel less guilty about taking one. I like that.
Yeah, it's attentiveness is fundamentally what it is. It's this attentiveness to myself, to the other, to God, to the moment. Because part of what happens when we get in productive mode, we're not ever in the moment. We're sort of chasing the future that never arrives. Or when we finally stop because we're just forced to it, we often go into kind of a nostalgia or a lament about the mistakes I've made through the day or through the week or through my life or whatever. So there's a regretting. that often comes when we finally stop. Where Sabbath is very much about being in the moment. It's about kind of this child right now who's trying to get my attention. So I get down on the floor and I give them my full attention. Or this meal that's been put before me, and I don't just shovel it down, but I savor it. I savor the taste. I practice a profound gratitude for the earth that gave me these things, and the animal that gave it this life, this joy that I can have, this company, the skill of whoever prepared this for me, or even just the joy of being in the kitchen and creating it. So all of these things are acts of attentiveness, and that would be the number one thing. And really, all of the liturgies I write in the book are a version of how to become present in those ways. But I believe I have a chapter on walking and just walking your neighborhood afresh. And why not go out and notice what you haven't noticed before? And this is much more potent than if I'm just in a drive and everything's whizzing by. Every time I go for a walk, even if it's a path I've walked 1,000 times, I will notice those things. And of course, weather changes. So a place looks different in rain or sun or fall or winter, etc. So I actually teach a whole class on Sabbath, Rebecca. And one of the very first things I have the class do is I have them write a poem. And I say, you don't have to be a good poet and you don't have to share it, but if you want to, you can. But a poem is an act of attentiveness. And I'm often astonished at people who don't typically write poetry, writing some really vivid and evocative poems as they stop and breathe and notice and capture that in some language.
Why did our society go so wrong in this idolizing productivity? Because I mean, when you first said the word poetry, I think my gut instinct is to be like, well, that's not productive. I don't do that.
There's a great quote. I forget his name, but he was being interviewed once, and he was asked, "When did you become a poet?" And he said, "Oh no, no. We're all born poets. We love language. We love to play with words. We love to play with sounds. The real question is, when did you stop being a poet?" And when you think about it, Rebecca, the things that matter most are in some ways a waste of time.
It's so true.
Because worship is unproductive. I mean, it renews us, but we don't do it for the sake of renewal. The renewal is a byproduct of the act of worship. We worship because God's worthy of it, because our souls actually are made for it, because if we don't, we end up worshiping anyhow, but the things are lesser and they'll eat us alive, etc. And if we get too tied into a culture of productivity that's measuring not only its kind of values, but also our worth by what we do, I think that's probably one of the biggest idols of the age, is that the idol of utility, pragmatism, and productivity.
If people start following or observing the Sabbath, will that just slowly start to kind of chip away at our idolatry of productivity the rest of the week?
I absolutely think so. I mean, a healthy Jewish understanding of the Sabbath is we don't live toward it, we live out of it. So it's not like we get the reward at the end of the long workday that now you can sort of, kick back. It's we live out of this space of rest, because rest is fundamentally trust. I can't rest if I can't trust. If my world feels always imperiled, always at the edge of falling apart, then I simply can't rest, because I have to manage things. I have to run around and sort of make sure I put my fingers in all the holes in the dikes or whatever. Whereas the ultimate act of trust is actually sleep. I just completely abandon myself to whatever might come. And I simply enter in this place of, God, you are there. You are working all things together for good. So I think if we practice that, the overflow of it is that the rest of the week starts to look a little saner, a little more tranquil, a little more restful, a little more peaceful. But the Sabbath is this thing we live out of, not sort of try to live toward.
Practically speaking, are there certain things that you would encourage people to do or not do? Like, should they put their phones away for the day? Should they not, go out and run errands, even if it's with their family? Should they, mostly be home?
Yeah.
Family time versus solitude, reading scripture. Sometimes I struggle with that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a sort of an old piece of wisdom that if you work with your hands, you should Sabbath with your mind. And if you work with your mind, you should Sabbath with your hands. So in other words,
that's why I like gardening.
Right.
Perfect break.
You're talking, you're thinking, you're doing podcasts and all that. So go out and pull carrots or something, touch the soil. If you're a carpenter, read a book on the Sabbath. So I think that's a general principle.
So, how do you personally keep the Sabbath?
The really practical thing is in Jewish practice, in order to anticipate the coming of the Sabbath, rabbis talked about think of the Sabbath as a queen or a bride coming to your house. This image has never worked for me. That just gives me anxiety. But what I think of when really good friends come, and when really good friends are coming, you kind of reorder your schedule. You're not just business as usual. You kind of try to do a bunch of stuff ahead of time that you can be fully present, fully available, go for walks, have meals, sit up a little later, having long conversations, laugh, reminisce, all that. So to me, building an anticipation for Sabbath, like it's a great friend coming, and what would you change in your schedule or, the typical routines that you have in order to be fully present and hospitable toward these really dear friends that you're so eager to spend time with. That just works for me because I just know if Kevin and Cindy are coming, they're very dear friends. My wife and I will well plan ahead. And I think that's the wisdom of the Jewish practice where you get stuff done beforehand so you can just savor what's happening in the moment.
I had Orthodox Jewish friends back when I was a TV reporter in Alabama, of all places. And it was really fun to see them prepare for the Sabbath, like you were saying. I mean, they would spend all day Friday leading up to sundown cooking. And my goodness, they had the biggest meals,
Yeah.
enough food for like 50 people.
Yeah.
And they did. They invited everyone to their homes. And I remember we took walks together. It was such a nice kind of anachronistic way of living for a day every week.
Yeah. And at its best, it is so beautiful. And I like your word anachronistic. Who does this anymore?
Right.
What if we did?
What do you think about phones? Like, do you turn your phone off?
My zipper, that's a piece of technology. So the sort of banning of all technology is just impractical. So we're talking about this invasive technology that just kind of beeping and making all sorts of sounds and endlessly distracting
The
us. Yeah,
notifications,
all of
those are
that.
so bad.
I would just start by, just as a general rule, turning off all your notifications, especially on Sabbath. But I don't have any notifications on my phone because I just don't want this thing endlessly diverting and distracting me. But if you have all my children live elsewhere. One lives in Taiwan. And so to sort of ban the technology that might allow me to FaceTime them during Sabbath, I just think to impose that as a general rule would be a miss. But the main thing is take anything that keeps pulling you back into the workaday world, this world of hurry, this world of productivity, whatever that may be, try to hide that thing from yourself for 24 hours. So if that is your phone, go quarantine the thing. There's an old practice of the Sabbath box, where the thing that was most likely to pull you back into the world, if you could actually put that in a literal box, put the box in a closet, lock the closet, make it off limits, and you know where it is, you can get to it, but it can't get to you. And that's the wisdom of that. So
Too bad we can't put certain apps in a closet. You can't really put your whole phone in, but I think if you're honest with yourself, you know what it is on your phone that distracts you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I might try that actually. Instagram, that's a bad one.
Oh, I was saying to somebody the other day, there's no other, I don't look at Facebook much or any of that stuff, but something about Instagram, and I'll suddenly realize I just spent a half an hour looking at nothing. And so I'm just actually 2 days ago decided enough of that. I'm gonna sort of enact some disciplines around that and put some boundaries around that.
Our culture, as we've discussed, glorifies being busy and productive to a fault. What's the biggest misconception about the Sabbath that you'd like for Christians to understand?
Yeah, that it has to be kept rather than it's a thing that keeps us. I think that there's such a default in the human heart that when we start a discipline, especially something so life-giving as a Sabbath, that we immediately want to know what are the rules here. And I think it's just part of the human condition that we want fairly clear structures around it. But finally, it is about paying attention. So if we can sort of become present and then allow the Sabbath to nurture us, restore us, bring us back into this right relationship with God, with ourselves, with others.
What's some practical advice for people who have obligations on Sunday they can't really get around? It's so hard nowadays. I have young kids, and all the birthday parties that people schedule on Sunday mornings, even sports games, that's a huge problem for parents who have kids that are serious athletes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a real problem.
We're in a cultural moment where it is almost impossible to participate in a full Sabbath just because we don't have any kind of structures anymore in the culture that would encourage it, promote it, give space for it. So it's really, really hard. But I would say, could you find 5 hours where you step back from your mode of productivity, that you got quiet, that you went for a walk, that you paid attention, those sorts of things? Find a shorter period that you could fit into a given day. Maybe you could find 2 of those a week. And what that will do is it will build a muscle for it, because it's usually hard at first. Hebrews 4 says, make every effort to enter the Sabbath. There's effortfulness at first, trying to reorder our lives around the practice of rest. If we haven't been restful, we're literally restless. And to sort of move into a place where you can truly rest and not be sort of just distracted and anxious and all of that, that's going to take some work. So why don't you start with the time that you can actually carve out and begin to practice it? And I think what will emerge out of that is some sense of how you can start to expand that time where you receive rest.
I love that. That's great advice for all of us, I think, who are busy all the time. What is the biggest impact you've seen on families and on their connectedness after following the Sabbath, whether it's your family personally or others?
Yeah, I was just with a pastor friend 2 nights ago, and his 3 daughters, aged 12, I think, through 6, were there. And they started a Sabbath practice as a family about 3 years ago. And I asked each of these young women what they love, and they actually all identified it as their favorite day of the week. And they talked about the meals. And the oldest one, she's just about to become a teenager, but she said, I just love that we can just enjoy being together. We can enjoy this meal, and all of the pressure of having to clean up and all that, or make the thing, that pressure's not on us. But what I was hearing through all of these young women waxing poetic about the Sabbath is, underneath, they felt they were connecting as a family in ways that the rush, you described at the beginning, the rush of any given day or week, we're together as a family, but we're not necessarily connected as a family. And they were celebrating this deep connection that they felt.
Certainly a lot to think about. Excited for Sunday now. I'm going to try to put some of this into practice.
Amen.
So in closing, is there one particular Bible verse that you consider your favorite or the most powerful to you when it comes to the Sabbath?
Well, I think the one that instantly came to mind, and often does, is Psalm 46:10, be still and know that I am God, which I take to mean that there's all sorts of things that we're going to miss about God unless we have a practice of slowness and rest. We won't know God in certain dimensions of his character if we don't have that practice of rest. That was really the premise of the book, The Rest of God, that it wasn't just the gift of rest, but the things about God that we discover when we rest.
Such a beautiful thing. There's so many facets to it. And yeah, it seems like it'll really deepen our relationship with God and help with our mental health, our family connectedness, all the good things.
Yeah.
So Mark Buchanan, thank you so much for joining us today on Fulfilled. This was such a valuable conversation.
Thanks, Rebecca.
One that I hope a lot of people take to heart.
Yeah, me too.
So thanks to all of you, our awesome listeners, for tuning in. And your support means so much. So if you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Stay inspired, keep trusting in God's plan for your life, and we'll see you next time.